My name is Timothy Kiprono with the Institute of Public Finance. I support work related to climate at the Climate Finance Unit and also related to governance work. Today, we'll talk about climate change with focus on adaptation financing. Climate change is no longer a future risk for Kenya. It's already shaping our economic, fiscal, and social pressure. Recurrent floods, food insecurity, water scarcity, all these kind of shocks that relate to climate are already disrupting lives. And just to show you why climate change is no longer a future risk, we can already see some of the challenges. Recent evidence illustrates, this challenge at scale. And so in 2022, for example, about 4.5 million people were affected, were food insecure. And that comes from droughts, for example. And that was around, covering around half of the counties that we have in Kenya, 23 ASAL counties. In 2023, El Nino floods displaced hundreds of households, damaging infrastructure, and this also was about 25 counties. These shocks are growing pressure on public finances. So in the sense that when we plan for something, then climate change happens and then we have to change that. And so to illustrate that and to just give you a sense of what that means, in 2024 alone, and that's 2023-24, government had to move about 73 billion of resources from something that was planned, and particularly in this case development, to respond to the emergencies that come from that. In 2026 alone, just this year, government moved or increased the budget for State Department of Special Programs by about 2,000%, so that then the government is able to respond to crisis. That tells you the significance and the issue of climate change is no longer something that you hear or read from books. It's here with us, and it's affecting not just communities but also shaping our fiscal decisions at national level and county level as well. Kenya has met commitments. Kenya is part of a global community that are also committing to addressing climate change. And so if you look at Kenya's nationally determined contribution, NDCs in short, and also look at our National Adaptation Plan, Kenya has met commitments to combat and deal with climate change, including adaptation. How do we adapt to systems? Now, the reason why this matters and very important, or this conversation today is very important, is that we've been doing some work around this. And recently we submitted an annual shadow budget to Parliament, which carries a couple of things. It carries our analysis of the problem. It also carries findings of how Kenya is financing to address this problem, but also contains recommendations of what we think Parliament should do. Now, in this paper, you read that adaptation from where we sit, or adaptation financing from where we sit, is not just an environmental issue. It is actually an investment. We need to think about how are we building or investing in climate smart so that our farmers do farming or are resilient to droughts or floods, for example. Is looking at drought resilience, is looking at water systems, looking at restoration and flood management. Early this year, Nairobi flooded. No one expected that it was going to flood. And then now when we look at evidence, of course, given that government of Kenya has committed, in NDCs and adaptation plans, the financing is not stable. It's not corresponding to the magnitude of climate shocks as we see. So the frequency of climate is increasing, the droughts are increasing, and they're so infrequent. But the financing of the infrastructure or the way we adapt is not catching up or matching the magnitude of what happens. And so some of the things that we've seen is that, analyzing the budget, we looked at around 32 projects from 2018 to around 2025, just tracking what is the trend in terms of financing these programs. And we come to a conclusion that most of the financing are reducing. And we'll talk about the findings just in a moment. But also we realize that financing for adaptation or preparation for climate change is also tied to projects. They are not investments that then have a long-term trajectory, as climate change is then long-term problem, so that then we start looking at it in that sense. So let me just quickly, highlight some of the findings that we included in the adaptation paper. Of course, we invite you to have a look at it. Is that the first finding is that adaptation financing has contracted sharply across a couple of sectors that we looked at. Comparing those periods, of course, 2018 to 2025. So, for example, in the agriculture sector, in 2018, 2019 to 2023, 22, there was an allocation of almost 74 or 75 billion. Now, what happens is that in the period 2023, 2024, 2025, 26, comparing those two periods, is that funding came down from 75 billion to around just 11 billion. That is 83%. When we look at another sector, which is the environmental protection, water, natural resources, they had almost about 40 billion. And between 2018, 2019 and 2023, 2022, 23, and when you compare within the period 2023 to 2025, 26, that funding has come down by 70% from 40 billion to around another 11 billion. Now, what also happens is that the movement of funding is that it also affects both sources of financing. So, external financing, which is donors and development partners and well-wishers, are contributing significantly to the budget, but also then government is putting in some resources there. Now, in terms of when the budget comes down, it comes down both in terms of government, but also external partners. So looking at the second finding, we find that major adaptation investments are declining or disappearing. Of course, that aligns with the general trend of financing, but then it becomes significant when, the important investment areas that we expect our government to be investing in are actually receiving or coming down or, receiving almost zero. So, for example, if you talk about climate smart agriculture project, the funding, compared to 2018, 2019 to 2023, 24, in this second period of 2023, 24 to 25, 26, the budget has reduced by almost 99%. Crop insurance, the same thing, 96%. Regional pastoral resilience projects reduced by almost 100%, and there's several others when you read the paper. And then we talk about the third finding, or at least then this becomes the opportunity for Parliament, but also for citizens to engage in this conversation, is that in 2026, most of the projects that we then, or the areas that government should be investing, are actually receiving zero. And some of this, like I said, the projects that I just mentioned, climate smart agriculture, crop insurance, livestock protection, Kenya Water, resilience project, and the likes, are actually receiving zero. What it means is that our parliament and national government should be actually looking at how do we safeguard this kind of projects, because when these kind of projects come to an end, it doesn't mean that the risk actually came to an end, because farmers are still exposed to droughts today. Floods are still happening everywhere, but we are not adapting to that. So we need to see that the adaptation investment then increases in scale, but also then sustained over time until at least the risk comes down. Now, so what this reveals is that most of our investments in adapting to climate change are project based, externally driven. They're also vulnerable to continuity, and they are weakly institutionalized within within the budget itself and sectors. And so to address some of these things, we in the shadow budget that we submitted to Parliament, what we asked Parliament a couple of things. The first one is to safeguard priority adaptation investment, and we are calling citizens, civil society, and also public officials to understand the magnitude and the challenges that comes with climate shocks, that we need to safeguard investment, that is adaptation. The second thing is we require transition and sustainability plans. So, for example, if donors are financing some of our investment, adaptation investments, then we need to see that when a donor program comes to an end, what replaces that, or how is government stepping in to then continue that? Because, like I said, the risk is still high, and so that means we need that investment to continue for longer before we, avert the risk. The third one is scaling domestic financing progressively, so that then we see, even as donors, phase out, or the donor space is shrinking, both for civil society and government or development, then we also need to see our local finances. The same way we finance education, the same way we finance roads and other things, we also need to see that we are investing in things that are helping us to adapt. The fourth thing that we ask Parliament is to actually institutionalize the climate budget labeling, or what experts call budget tagging. Now, this requires, National Treasury, or what we're asking Parliament is to require National Treasury to operationalize climate budget tagging and standardize the reporting of the same, so that then Parliament is able to see and oversight what it can see. Otherwise, right now it becomes very difficult because the climate budget is not labeled, that is easy to find and identify or locate within the budget. And so what it means is that Parliament cannot oversight what it cannot see or clearly see. Strengthen the fifth one is to strengthen oversight implementation. So one of the things that we've seen, and you'll see in the paper, is that even where government has done something, some projects come to an end without actually 100% absorption, or where projects are completed but the risk still retains. So what does that mean? So it's either the project was not implemented fully, or effectively, so that then the risk is abated. And the last one is, we need to align our budgets, both at national account level, to Kenya's commitments in the nationally determined contribution and also adaptation plans. So in the sense that when we make commitments, then those commitments needs to be translated through the budget. And so the last message that I want to leave our citizens, Parliament, and national institutions, including National Treasury, is that we need to adapt. There is no shortcut to that. It is time we adapt. It's time we implement and invest in, building resilience, both for our finances, physical, looking at when we project our budget, do we take climate shocks into perspective? We need to think about, building the resilience of farmers, so when they do farming, they don't lose their produce or livestock and start again, because then climate change has implications on communities. Thank you.